Monday, incredibly big day at the White House. So let's go through a few things from different people's point of view. I've been reading various experts have been saying because it seems to me there's a fundamental mismatch between military and diplomatic objectives here. So let us begin with from the US position. It's a tweet of something the US ambassador to NATO has said. So let's go through this. The security guarantees that were mentioned obviously are going to be crucial. Ukraine is going to have to not only understand the security guarantees that they need and explain those to NATO allies, but the NATO allies are going to have to be willing to step up. That's why they're at the White House tomorrow as well. So, which is not at all, well, partially. The reason why all those European leaders are at the White House as well today is not because Zelenskyy needs to communicate his security guarantees to them and they need to say how they're going to step up. It's because they need Trump to not demand the impossible. But that is the American position. They think that the likes of van der Leyen and Meloni and Macron, Merz and Starmer and Rutte, all that lot, are going. I mean, Rutte, yes, because he's the Secretary General of NATO. But in terms of the others, like, they're not going. Like, why is Ursula von der Leyen going there, for example? Well, what's she's got to do with NATO, right? No, the reason they're going there is because they need Trump to change on at least some things. Now, why is that? Well, let's go to something else. So, oh, for goodness sake, I could do without this today. Will you stop messing about? So that's just the MAGA position. Well, yeah, by definition, that's Trump's position. That is effectively a spokesperson for Trump's position. So, in terms of everything else, this is the situation here. So in the pink, you've got 5 regions there. Now, they are not regions that Putin has, by the way. Those are the regions he wants. So he has Crimea. He has bits of some of the others. But these are what he wants. Now, what Putin has said he will accept, as I understand it, it's very difficult to get a firm understanding, of course, because Trump isn't exactly full of clarity when he speaks. But as I understand it, what Putin has effectively said is, you ain't having Crimea back. I mean, that is the most secure of the territories for Russia. Crimea is not going back into Ukrainian hands anytime soon. That is clear. But what Putin wants is the Donbass region, as I understand it, which is the top bits there, right? It's the bits to the north. Now, as I said, Russia doesn't hold all of those. It holds some parts of those territories and not all of them. So what Putin appears to be saying, but again, it's not really what he will be saying, but this is as Trump understands it, that Putin is saying, look, we can have peace if Ukraine has to accept that it's not having Crimea back. It has to accept that it can't be a NATO member, but I'll come on to that in a moment. We get Donbass and maybe we concede a bit down south, right? So Trump's thinking, well, that seems very fair, give and take on land, even though it's all Ukraine's land. And then we'll have peace. But we won't have peace. Say, no, Phil, red is occupied, thick border is the claim. No, I'm pretty sure I've checked this. Not all of that red is actually firmly occupied. But anyway, oh no, sorry. No, you're right. Hold on. No, it is. Sorry, no, you're correct. I suppose you would be correct. Okay, but they still want more of it, more of those regions. But the point is, some of the regions that particularly in the northeast there, that Putin wants, and that Trump thinks that Zelensky should concede, if we go to a little comment here, it lays out exactly why this is a ridiculous thing to concede. So, is a journalist, by the way, says Moscow has demanded that Ukraine accepts reality and withdraws from territory Russia hasn't been able to conquer after 11 years of war. Remember, the invasion of Ukraine took place in 2014, not 2022. So Russia has been actively invading Ukraine for 11 years. And it has been unable, the territories that Putin wants Zelensky to concede and that Trump now wants Zelensky to concede are territories that Russia, this giant military power, so we're told, has been trying to occupy for over a decade and been unable to. Now, you have to ask yourselves at that point, why is it? Now, I'm not an expert on the topography of Ukraine, of course, but I know enough to know some areas of land are more defensible than others. So if Russia has been trying to defend an area for over a decade and been unable to, Ukraine has actually been able to hold it, it's a pretty good defensive position. Now, if Ukraine were to withdraw from that territory, and Russian forces would, of course, move in to take over, and that would be part of the peace deal, Russia would then hold very defensible territory, which means two things. If we suggest that maybe Vladimir Putin is not the most honest of chaps and that he doesn't intend this to be a permanent peace deal, but he just wants to spend a couple of years rearming and re-invade again later on, you've just given him a very defensible piece of land, which means two things. Which means the Ukrainian territory to the west of it, where he would want to move into, is less defensible. So actually then it becomes easier for him to invade further into Ukraine. Secondly, Ukraine cannot easily launch a counterattack because they will have given Russia the high ground effectively. I don't actually know if it's high ground, but the defensible territory. That is why I'm looking at this and thinking this is quite impossible. But we'll come back to that, because what I want to look at is, so again, we need to get this thing from everyone's point of view, not political point of view, but practical point of view. So there's an article in The Guardian, there's a couple of articles in The Guardian from experts on this, talking about from various points of view. But the particular one I'm looking at the moment is Simon MacDonald. For those who don't know, he used to be the permanent secretary of the Foreign Office. So he is a very experienced, very knowledgeable diplomat. He understands diplomacy, right, at a very, very high level. So he is an expert on diplomacy. Now, this is what he has said. In terms of the diplomatic realities, he's not at all talking about the military realities. So he says, I'll read the last bit of this article. It says, but what if the comprehensive agreement also had something important for him? Putin's two key territorial requirements are the land bridge to Crimea and the whole of Donbass. He has the first, but not the second. Ukraine would hate giving up land that Russia has never conquered. But the aim here is peace, and peace always requires concessions. Which is not true, by the way. A diplomatic peace requires concessions. A military peace requires victory. But the problem here at the moment is America is not willing to allow Ukraine to have the strength to achieve the military victory. So from his point of view, he's saying realistically the only peace we can get anytime soon is a diplomatic peace, I guess. Ukraine has, of course, a great interest in ending the fighting. It wants to do that with honour, and it wants no resumption. The precedent is the Winter War of 1939 to 1940. At the outset, Finland looked completely outgunned by the Soviet Union, but like the Ukrainians, they fought bravely. Like the Ukrainians, they did much better than any outsider predicted. But in the end, they ceded more land than the Soviets were occupying in order to make peace, 11% of their territory, including Karelia inspiration for their national composer's most famous piece of music. Someone will have to tell me what that is in the comments below, please, because I'm not familiar with Finnish music. In 1940, Finland had reason to fear that the Soviets would be back for more. Operation Barbarossa came to their rescue 1 year later when the Soviet Union was the target of the biggest land invasion in history. In 2025, Ukraine needs something more immediate. Membership of NATO is the most obvious something. Of course, Trump has ruled that out. But he has conceded something that sounds similar, by the way. But I'll come on to that. Actually, no, I'll come on to it now before I finish this off. So what Steve Witkoff has said, who is Trump's envoy, he has suggested that, you know, Ukraine won't get NATO membership, but it can have an agreement along the Article 5 lines, which sounds weird to me, because to me, it sounds like this would be the benefits of NATO membership without the obligations. It would suggest that Ukraine, or what's left of Ukraine, after this peace deal or stitch up, whatever you want to call it, someone's just saying Sibelius is Finland's most famous composer. What was the piece of music they're referring to there? If it's that, Corellia, the inspiration for it. Anyway, Witkoff's talking out of his arse. Yeah, he does that a lot. He don't know what he's doing, you see. See, unlike Simon McDonald, Steve Witkoff is not a diplomat. The reason why he was made Trump's envoy is because, like, he's a fellow property developer and plays golf with Trump. He's a golf buddy, right? Who knows nothing about diplomacy. So, of course, he's talking out his arse. But nonetheless, what he said is Ukraine could get the benefit of that. In other words, if Russia were to reinvade the rest of Ukraine, then that would be considered an attack on all 30-odd members of NATO. At that point, you would then have to say, so what would NATO do about it? If that's the security guarantee, does that mean America would then provide direct military support for Ukraine? That's the question. And if that is what they're suggesting, then I'm going to say, why are you opposed to them joining NATO then? Because what you are that would basically be giving Ukraine all the benefits of NATO. So the only difference between that and joining NATO is that with this deal, it's a one-sided deal that favours Ukraine, in theory, but you're not asking Ukraine to stump up a certain level of defence spending, which it's doing anyway, actually. I mean, Ukraine's defence spending is more than above the threshold required for NATO. But also, Ukraine wouldn't have to back anyone else. Like, for example, if Russia also then tried to invade Finland, that would suggest Ukraine wouldn't have to back up Finland. That would be mad. Why would you do that? But anyway, I'll carry on reading this comment. Zelenskyy won't like any of this. He would have to consult his cabinet and parliament before conceding any of it. Of course, yes, it's not Zelenskyy's gift to do that. But he would be able to outline the bare bones of a deal to bring to an end the bloodiest conflict in Europe since the end of the Second World War, a prize worth taking. Putin too wouldn't like it. A Ukraine whose security is guaranteed by a power other than Moscow is inimical to him. But if Russia rejects an offer everyone else can grudgingly accept, Trump would see Putin for what he has been to date, the problem. He would have the knowledge and justification for upping the US contributions to Ukraine's defence. Today's meeting in Washington is one of the oddest in modern diplomacy, but European leaders can turn oddness into opportunity. So what McDonald seems to be suggesting is, what Ukraine has to do is to agree to something that Ukraine really will not want to agree to, in order to force Russia into, because again, going back to this map, as I understand what McDonald is suggesting is, Russia would then have to accept that it will withdraw in parts of the southeast in return for getting extra territory in the northeast. It would have to withdraw from parts of the southeast. That's my understanding. Otherwise, it's not really a land trade, is it? That's what they're saying. Any territorial changes require constitutional change, and constitution can't be amended during war. No, indeed. But this is where it's always understood with it's like a trade agreement. A trade agreement, you agree a trade agreement and you sign it and everything, but it's usually a couple of years before it comes online because there's an implementation period. This would be the same thing. So yes, you would have to have that implementation period. And at any point anything isn't implemented, then the peace deal breaks down. Obviously, if any peace deal did emerge, then will Russia agree to it? That's the point. Will Russia agree to it? Because the two things would have to happen the same. I mean, you couldn't, for example, agree to, okay, like Ukraine will withdraw from the Donbass and then you withdraw from the rest of it, because like, no. We will withdraw at the same time as you withdraw from the areas you say you're going to withdraw from. So again, who would manage that withdrawal process? Because you wouldn't trust Putin to honour the peace deal for more than a few months. Like, if Ukraine withdraws from the Donbass, Russia moves in, and then what happens when Russia breaks the rest of the peace deal? What happens then? Hope there's a time where Europe doesn't have to kiss US ass over European matters. Yes, I mean, this is what should happen. I mean, it's like your first comment, like the Europe should not leave itself in a position where it can be so vulnerable. We're vulnerable because we didn't look to our own defences. We relied too much on America. We actually relied too much on America. And it's utterly ridiculous. Russia is not powerful. Russia is not a powerful country. It shouldn't be able to invade a European country against... Because, like, you think about it, it's not even like Europe's particularly divided over this. We know that Russia has allies in Europe, like, you know, Hungary and Slovakia. But it doesn't have many, and it doesn't have powerful ones. You know, even Italy, you know, Giorgia Meloni is really one of the most eye-opening features of this whole thing. Like, her party, her politics is entirely aligned with Trump and Putin. You know, in the past, she's been completely aligned with Trump and Putin. She doesn't like the EU. She's not interested in European unity. But she, and by the way, not all of her party share her views on this, I grant you. But she is at the very forefront. There's been multiple European leaders. They're all basically going to Washington now, who have been stalwart in their opposition to Russia. And Meloni is one of them, because she recognises, and Italy is pretty much, you don't have to measure it on the map. I'm not saying it's definitely, but it is pretty much surely one of the countries in Europe furthest away from the conflict. She's Italy's pretty much as far away. I'm not saying, oh, you'll find Ireland's further away. Yeah, I'm sure there's a couple of other countries that are. But generally speaking, as Europe goes, Italy is surely one of the furthest away from the conflict. And yet, an Italian nationalist who naturally aligns with Trump and Putin, or has done, nonetheless sees the threat to Italy. So that's actually sort of quite interesting. Yes, that's in Spain and Portugal. Yes, I'm sure there are a few others, but not many. Not many. So if she can see that with her politics and her geography, then the rest of Europe can. Because my worry is, Europe has now decided that, yes, Europe has to look after its own things. For the next few years, it's going to have to buy American military equipment. It has to support Ukraine militarily. It has to do all of these things. It has to keep Trump on side, basically, for the rest of Trump's term. And maybe if another MAGA wins after that, maybe a couple of years, it could take 10 years before Europe can actually stand on its own 2 feet. And it's utterly ridiculous we do this. Russia is not strong. It's maddening to me. I wish someone would explain to me. It's all right saying that European armies are like hollowed out and stuff like that, and cost of living crisis, all the rest of it. I absolutely get that. I still need someone to explain to me why European militaries could not just go into Ukraine at Ukraine's invitation and first of all enforce a no-fly zone, shoot Russian planes down. Are you telling me that European air forces cannot shoot down the Russian air force? Of course we could. Of course we could. And then once we've established a no-fly zone, support Ukraine from... We wouldn't even have to commit European armies. We wouldn't need European armies, just the Air Force and maybe Navy. Enforce a no-fly zone. And then when we've done, only for Russia, we'll fly. And then from there, support Ukraine from the air in taking the rest of Ukraine. Militarily, surely we could do that. Russia is not strong. Why aren't we doing it? Why are we not doing it? Because we don't want direct conflicts with Russia. You know, a proxy war with Russia is one thing. We don't want a direct war with Russia. Why? Why? I mean, the fear of nuclear escalation, that's the obvious one. Is that really it? Are we? Because that's mutually assured destruction. If Putin launches a nuclear strike in response to a conventional war, then Moscow and St. Petersburg will have nuclear weapons rained down on them. Like, you know. Esfat saying there are no Russian planes in Ukraine, mostly rockets and drones. Yeah, because that's much cheaper. But nonetheless, if you have air control, first of all, you cut those out. But second of all, you would go into Russian territory as well, because you'd need to attack their air bases and launch sites. But also, you can then bombard land targets. If you've got control of the skies, you can use that to bomb land, because that's how wars are fought. We've seen this. You know, we've seen this in the last few decades. That's what you do. You bombard the land targets from the air safely. It's how the Gulf War, you didn't have very many Allied casualties. Why? Because you just bombed the crap out of things from the sky. Don't underestimate Russian drone warfare. It's very good. I'm sure it is. But I'm also sure we can counter it. But either way, it doesn't matter what the reason is. We're not doing it. We're not doing it. You know, I mean, so what are we prepared to, you know, I don't know why, but we're not prepared to do it. Still vulnerable to having the drone infrastructure smashed by Ukraine, plus the logistic routes and so on. Yeah, yeah. Like, and a direct attack against Russia wouldn't just be operating in Ukraine. You would also have to, by definition, operate in Western Russia. You would take out military sites, military targets in Western Russia. It would be a direct, it wouldn't be an invasion of Russia. There'd be no land invasion of Russia. But it would be, you would attack military targets inside Russia's borders. And for whatever reason, we don't want to do that. But all I'm saying is that this risks a direct conflict with Russia later on. You know, if you end up with a peace deal where Ukraine withdraws from very defensible territory, conceding it to Russia, that means, as I go back to saying, that means Russia holds the defensible territory now, so then it becomes way harder to shift them if they break the peace deal later on. And by definition, that presumably means, I can't really put it on my pointer, but that presumably means the areas to the wherever this new border forms, the Ukrainian side to the west of it presumably is less defensible, so easier to invade. So then that sort of pinkish, that salmon pink area sweeps to the west in a few years' time. Isn't Ukraine due to receive back more NATO-trained pilots around now and again during the autumn? Or have I gotten the wrong end of the bush on it? They have been, yes. I mean, one of the difficulties with training troops in an active war is it means pulling away your best trained troops from the front lines when you can ill afford it. So, but Ukraine has now worked out a process of being able to do that without risking losing a load of land. So yes, there has been a lot of training of Ukrainian forces going on. But the importance of today is they still need America to be supplying those weapons, the Patriot missile systems and intelligence, you know, Starlink, all of that is essential for Ukraine. And although Europe, I'm not even sure America's paying for anything at the moment. It may still be paying something. But I think the only thing America is actually physically providing with its own money is from the funds that was authorized during Biden's time. So I don't think Trump is providing anything new at all. I think everything that the United States is providing is effectively been funded by Europe now. So, I mean, this really should be, again, presumably what Europe's there for, to just remind him. I mean, this is what I would like to think is happening behind closed doors. It's like you've got to flatter Trump, but you've also got to have steel. People say that about Trump. He's very easily offended. In fact, actually, early in the article, McDonald makes the point. Obviously, you've got all these European leaders there. They're not all going to be talking to Trump at once because he'll feel overwhelmed, right? They'll need one spokesperson. McDonald has suggested either Starmer or Rutte for the reason being that they are the ones who speak English the best. Says many of the others can speak English reasonably well. In other words, like, you know, the likes of, you know, von der Leyen and Meloni and so on, they can speak English, he says, well enough to make their point. But because there's certain nuances in a language you might miss, and they could easily end up offending him with just the phrasing of it or not understanding his phrasing. So you need someone who's really very, very, very fluent in English, including subtleties and nuances of slang and so on. So they all speak English better than Trump, yes, but that, yeah, they do, yes. But nonetheless, the point he was making is it's not enough to get a point across. You have to do it in a certain way. And if you do it in one particular way, you could just offend Trump. And flattery is essential. It needs to be not an opposition to Trump, but, they're on the same side, shoulder to shoulder. But at the same time, people also say of Trump, you also have to show that you're not weak. He preys on weakness, right? So you have to show you're in a strong position. So so it's like carrot and stick. So the carrot is you need to speak his language. So Rutte or Starmer, they've suggested. The stick, though, what is Europe's stick? It's not really been mentioned by anyone, so maybe it's not a factor. But I would think the stick is effectively in terms of trade. First of all, the EU swallowed those 15% tariffs. They wouldn't have done that a few years ago. Why are they doing that? I think because they need Trump on side for Ukraine. Now, if Trump's going to threaten to pull all support from Ukraine, could the EU say, well, we're going to have to reevaluate the... Is that why von der Leyen's there? Because that's what I keep asking myself. Why is von der Leyen there? I can understand all the others, and most of the others also represent the EU. The only people who don't represent the EU there, correct me if I'm wrong, is Rutte and Starmer. Ironically, the two that McDonald says should do the talking. Rutte is, of course, representing, although he's Dutch, he's representing NATO. And Starmer, of course, representing the UK, which is not a member of the EU. All the others are EU leaders, right? So Macron, Merz and Meloni are like the three most powerful heads of government in the EU anyway, aren't they? I mean, I know Spain's sort of on the same par as Italy. They're not there. But nonetheless, you've got three of the most powerful countries in the EU represented there. You don't need von der Leyen. Why do you need von der Leyen? That's what I keep asking myself. Why is she there? And I'm thinking, is that because she's going to be the stick in terms of trade? Is she the one who can say, we came to this agreement with you on trade in return for your continued support for Ukraine. If you're going to withdraw that support, we will withdraw our support for your trade aims. Is that it? And then also the fact that it's like, well, we're agreeing to buy a load of American weapons. If you're going to say that if you're going to force this deal, then we won't do that. That's probably a harder threat to make, because Trump will be saying, well, if you don't agree to the peace deal, Ukraine needs more weapons, you'll have to buy more off us. So I don't know whether that would work, but maybe the first one would work. Ukraine just unveiled their new cruise missile, Flamingo. It looks like a V1 rocket, can fly 3,000 kilometers, 1,000 kilogram payload. Going to be spicy, yes. But isn't Zelenskyy between a rock and a hard place here? If he gives into this deal, he gives away valuable land. If he carries on, he's seen as wanting more. Well, yes, that is the problem. That is what they have to navigate today. They have to, that's what McDonald is basically saying. They have to agree to something that you really shouldn't be agreeing to, but grudgingly agree to something. What they need to do is to get Trump to change what they're agreeing to, because what they're agreeing to at the moment is like totally ridiculous. But get him to agree to something that looks like a big concession, then put the onus on Russia with the expectation that Russia will not agree. Because, so Professor Tim, I've forgotten his name. Wilson, is it? He has a YouTube channel. He's more of an expert on these things. He did a video yesterday on his channel explaining that with what Putin claims to be conceding, he's breaking his own law. That these regions here on this map to the east of Ukraine, by law in Russia, they have to be considered Russian. So you're not even in Russia allowed to suggest that Russia withdraws from any of them. But Putin claims he will withdraw from some of them. So Putin's breaking his own law. So will Putin really go back to his own people and say, good news, everyone, we're going to expand into Donbass, but we're going to we're going to withdraw, for example, troops in Kherson? Is he going to say that? Is he going to be able to go back to his own people and say that? You know, or has Putin... See, this is the double bluff, isn't it? From Putin's point of view, does he think he's made his concessions to Trump to make it look like he wants peace, knowing that Ukraine will refuse? And then he gets to claim Ukraine is the barrier to peace, right? Or is there going to be a triple bluff here? Does Ukraine call Putin's bluff? Does Ukraine go, okay, all right, we can do this, as long as it makes sure it gets those security guarantees and it makes sure it does not withdraw unless it's in tandem with Russia withdrawing? Does it agree to it as a triple bluff to then force Putin to have to be the one that's blocking peace? Because when it comes time to the withdrawal, Russia refuses to withdraw from, like, Kherson, for example. But there we go. Yeah, Roger said it is Tim Wilson. There we go. But there it is anyway. That is the situation. It's an absolute nightmare of a scenario. We should have done this a long time ago, I think. Someone tried to pull me up on this yesterday, but I'm sorry. We should have done this a long time ago. Before Trump's first term in office, even under Obama, it looked like America were not that interested in European security. Now, you could have argued it is more taking it for granted, or you could have argued it's just because Obama is not so much... Like, Biden is a bit different. Biden's very much a product of the Cold War. Obama, not so much. You know, obviously, he remembers the Cold War, but he wasn't necessarily a product of it in the same way, because he grew up in the tail end of it more. In the same way as Biden. Biden, very much a product of the Cold War. He grew up entirely under the Cold War, and saw all phases of it. Whereas now we're getting president, even though Trump would also, but he himself isn't, and we're going to be increasingly getting presidents who are not children of the Cold War, and therefore don't think in those US versus Soviet terms. But it was, there was impression was very much being given that America saw the Pacific as a bigger security issue for them than Europe. Europe should have taken the hint. And during Trump's first term, they definitely should have taken the hint. Instead, Trump lost, Biden won. They breathed a sigh of relief, thought, thank God we've got someone who's back on our side. And yeah, Biden, absolutely. Biden is very much aligned with Europe on security matters. But he's one guy. He's one guy, one old guy. It weren't going to last. Even if Trump didn't win, it wasn't going to last. So, utterly ridiculous. And it's like everything in politics. You have to wait until there's an actual catastrophe. ridiculous to me. You actually have to wait for a calamity before you do anything. Just imagine if Nigel Farage became UK PM while the conflict with Russia continues. Any number of people, yes. So at the moment, we have the coalition of the willing, who are going to, it's not all of Europe, but it's a good chunk of Europe, including some of the most powerful defensive countries in Europe, who are looking at boosting defence spending, working on defence more collaboratively, so that Europe can not only have a better defence, but provide its own defence, not be reliant on American sales of things. And do you know what? It will be sweet if we get through this. In 10 years' time, it'll be sweet if the US president at the time, in 10 years' time, it won't be Trump, of course, but someone else, and we're not buying American arms as much, and then the American president at the time complains about this, and we say to them, well, whose fault is it? You know, America told us that we couldn't rely on them as a defence provider. So that's why we embarked on this path to supply ourselves, and now we can. And now we don't have to put up with your bullshit. Right? Still allies, obviously. America and Europe will always hope to be allies. Very powerful partnership. But it will mean that Europe doesn't have to swallow America. You know, when, you know, it'll be more like a friendship, a proper friendship. Like when your friend comes up with bullshit, you tell them, you're talking bollocks, mate. And that's what Europe needs to be able to do to America a bit more. But there's a long way to go before we get there. And all sorts of things could queer the deal. In the UK, we face a serious threat of a pro-Putin apologist heading the government. In France, there's the possibility of National Rally coming to power. I don't think they're going to end up being like Italy, where they accept that Russia is a threat to France. I don't think we can count on that. You know, I mean, most of the rest of Europe's probably fine. But Meloni may step down for someone else who is not of her mind, but is still on the far right. So, you know, and Poland, of course, is very much hamstrung now, with the Polish president being a pro-Putin apologist. So, you know, you've got countries that this coalition of the willing is fragile. You know, if it can last the full 10 years, then yes, we should be in a better position. But can it last? That is a big question as well. Alec, they're saying, just highlights how important PR is for the UK. All sorts of electoral reform, indeed. Yes, it is vital. And if only we could get the current government to see that. We should not be buying weapons we need permission to use. In the fullness of time, no. But again, in the here and now, you know, it's entirely about, first of all, boosting our defensive capabilities, but secondly, because the sort of weapons you're referring to there that we are going to be buying, we would hope never to use. If we do use them, then shit's got real. But there it is. But we'll leave it there anyway. We'll have to just wait and see what happens now while I try to work out what's actually going on in British politics today, because it's not a lot, for my second video. Because the next video at 1 o'clock is also going to be about America, I'm afraid, although it's nothing to do with this. More Trump nonsense, though. But thanks for coming on, everyone. Have a great rest of day. And until next time, I'll see you later.